Thanks, Nita. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second Future Leader Fellowships webinar for businesses. My name is Abby, and I'm the project coordinator for the Future Leader Fellowship scheme at Innovate UK. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Gabrielle Newson, who is the senior project manager for the Future Leader Fellowship scheme at Innovate UK as well. So today's presentation will focus on how to apply to the Future Leader Fellowships. We'll do a very brief recap on what the scheme is all about, and then move on to discussing how to write a high quality application. We'll then share a recording of a panel discussion with 3 of the Future Leader Fellowships shortlisting panel members who will reflect on their experience of assessing applications in previous rounds and share some advice on how to make sure your application stands out. Next, we'll move on to our how-to section, where Gabrielle will guide you through each stage of the process and provide some important information about setting up your JES account and preparing your application form. And then finally, as Anita mentioned, we have a Q&A session at the end where you can submit your questions to us in the Q&A box. And just a note to say that we've got quite a lot to cover in this webinar. So the Q&A session may run on by about 15 minutes or so. If you need to leave due to other commitments, please feel free to do so, and be assured that we will be recording this session, so nothing will be missed, and you'll receive a copy of that recording once the webinar has ended. Another thing quickly to mention is that hopefully you should have all seen the first webinar by now, which gives a much more comprehensive overview of the Future Leader Fellowship scheme. If you haven't already seen it, I really recommend that you watch it, and we'll be circulating a link to that recording along with this webinar recording too. So to recap on what the Future Leader Fellowships is, the Future Leader Fellowships is a scheme that provides the funding and support for talented researchers and innovators to lead on converting an idea into reality. As we discussed in the first webinar, it's not just another project grant. It's made up of three key pillars: the innovation and research, the individual, and the host organisation. It's open to UK businesses and academic institutions who can apply for up to £1.5 million worth of funding over 4 years. The grant will fund the fellow's salary, as well as the salaries of the team they build around them should they choose to take this route. It will also fund the research and innovation work that's undertaken, either as a project or a portfolio of smaller related projects, plus any additional funds for the fellow's leadership and development. And you can choose to do your fellowship part-time, and we offer a reduced hours fellowship where fellows can spend up to 40% of their time focusing on other activities within the business, such as fulfilling existing contracts, in order to enhance their career and their leadership abilities. And this is, again, another recap of the application and assessment process, which you would have been introduced to in the first webinar. So you can see it takes us through from submitting the outline proposal all the way through to invitation to interviews. For today's webinar, we are going to be focusing on the first part of the process, so the written part of the application and responding to the reviewers' comments. But if you are invited to interview, we will be providing some extra support along the way to make sure that you're fully prepared for that final stage of the assessment process. So writing a high quality application, that's really what this webinar is about and what we're hoping to give you some more information on today. So I think the best place to start with writing a high quality application is really assessing your suitability for the scheme to make sure that the Future Leader Fellowships is the right thing for you as your situation currently stands. So we introduced these questions in the first webinar, but I think they're really useful to ask yourself just to make sure that the Future Leader Fellowships is right for you. So firstly, ask yourself, do I have evidence of success in my career? Remember, this doesn't have to be just patents and publications. You can demonstrate success in a variety of ways. So perhaps you were involved in developing a product, or you might have been involved in something less tangible, like developing a new process or methodology. You should also ask yourself, am I already creating and innovating? Bearing in mind that this grant isn't for total beginners, you need to have some experience under your belt to show that you're ready to take on a grant of up to £1.5 million. Although having said this, you don't need to have previously received grant funding to be competitive in this scheme. Ask yourself, is my idea big enough? The Future Leader Fellowship scheme is a 4-year scheme, which is a long time. So your idea really should be big enough to justify this length of investment. Are you developing new approaches that will create change? It's so important with these projects that the idea will create impact beyond just your business, which could be economic, social, or environmental. And we will talk about this in a bit more detail further on in the presentation. And then finally, will I take my team with me on the journey to success? This scheme is all about future leaders, and we're looking for leaders who will take their team with them on their journey and really consider important things like equality, diversity, and inclusion when building your team. So if you ask yourself those questions and you think, yes, the fellowship is for me, I'd like to apply. When you're planning your fellowship, it's really important that you can shape what you're doing so that it encompasses both your business objectives and your own personal development. I recently spoke to Rachel Carey from Zinc Ventures, who is one of our business-based fellows from round 3. And I thought her reflection on this part of the process was really useful to share with you today. So she says, the fellowship planning process was actually a really good prompt for me to think a bit more specifically about my own development and career goals. In practice, shaping the project involved working closely with Zinc's chief exec and general manager to define a programme of work that would align with Zinc, but would also allow me to do something I otherwise wouldn't have been able to do. So this is really where the 3 pillars that I mentioned earlier, the research and innovation, the individual, and the host, need to come together, and you need to draw these 3 strands together throughout your application form. So as a future leader, you will be developing your own unique voice, and this needs to be evident in the written application. So with this in mind, the majority of the application does need to be written by the applicant and not on their behalf. You should highlight the unique positive impacts that will happen when you lead and reflect on your strongest qualities and personal leadership style and how this will set you apart. So a really good place to start is really simply to ask yourself, why am I the best person to take on this award? The Future Leader Fellowship Scheme is also a brilliant way to expand your network and to collaborate with project partners, such as universities, businesses, and other organisations. Project partners can be from the UK or overseas, and their contribution can be financial or in kind. You'll need to detail how any of these arrangements will work in your application form, and Gabrielle is going to talk to you about this in a bit more detail later on in the presentation. But I really encourage you to reach out to new organisations who may benefit from your work, or even who could offer a fresh perspective on its value, and then evidence this as evidence of your proactiveness in your application form. As I mentioned earlier, the work you propose as part of your fellowship should be outside of business as usual activities, potentially with enhanced risk. And therefore, in order to justify funding, it's really important that you can articulate the impact of your work beyond just how it will benefit your business. So you can talk about the social, economic, or environmental impacts. And while global impact is great, it is really important that these benefits are rooted firmly in the UK. You should also justify why the scheme is the best funding option for you and your proposed programme of work, bearing in mind the unique opportunities the Future Leader Fellowships offer. Therefore, I encourage you to ask yourselves, why can't the work I'm proposing be achieved through other routes or project grants, and articulate this clearly in your application to show why the Future Leader Fellowship scheme is the best funding option for this proposed work. And then finally, we expect future leaders to have vision, and you should present your vision as something that builds up as a narrative throughout your application. So it needs to tie everything together and be really clear to the reader what it is that you're trying to achieve as part of this fellowship. You'll find when you start doing your application form that we have kept things deliberately free form to give you the freedom and flexibility to convey that vision in the best way that you see fit, that best articulates what you want to achieve with this project. But we also need you to provide adequate detail to build up the assessor's confidence in your ability to deliver right from the very start. So make sure there are clear deliverables in the first 2 years and that robust plans and detailed work packages are in place to achieve these deliverables, because this will really show, it will back up your vision and show that it's achievable. You should then provide a higher level overview and details for years 3 and 4, including optional routes for risk mitigation and some of the different routes you can take forwards. Because by doing this, you acknowledge that as well as rewards, there will be risk with your project and that you have thought about this contingency planning. It's also worth mentioning that if there have been any early projects, studies or market research that has been done that back up your idea, please do mention it, because again, it just goes to build confidence in your ability to deliver and the project itself. So, as I mentioned earlier, I spoke to Rachel Carey, who's one of our round 3 fellows, and I also was fortunate enough to speak to some of our other fellows. And I asked them to share some advice that they would give to future applicants to the scheme based on their experiences so far. So now we've just got a really short video with some of our round 3 Future Leader Fellows sharing their tips on how to write a really high quality application.
The first part of the application process is writing your proposal. And for your proposal, you need probably 2 things. You need to be sure you are the right person. So do you have the track record to carry out the work that you're proposing? And you need to have an idea that is good enough and groundbreaking enough, okay? Because it is a large amount of time that's been funded and a large body of money that's been funded as well. So I think in terms of leadership, I think I've had a lot of people reach out and ask me about leadership, and leadership is rather loosely defined. So try and think about leadership in terms of everything. Leadership in as wide a scope as possible. And also, it's not just leadership for you, it's leadership for everybody. If you have a team working for you, where are they going to be at the end of your fellowship? Are they still going to be just basically doing what you tell them, or are they going to have hopefully develop some degree of autonomy?
Advice I'd say is be specific and plan the details. So I spent quite a lot of time in the early stages of my bid really putting a framework around what I wanted to do over the 4 years. And whilst it may not pan out that way, because we don't know what challenges are ahead. It was really clear to help me set a vision for it was really useful to help me set a vision for what was required of the project or of the fellowship itself. And so that helped me build up an idea of what resources did I require, how much will that cost me, what equipment do I need, and what are the stages that we'll go through to sort of make sure we're focusing on the right things. So I think with that with that in mind, being specific about how you want the fellowship to run, what your end goal is, what the vision is, and then developing a plan to get there is a piece of advice that I definitely give. I think the second point is being honest about constraints, about things that you're not sure about, or things that are uncertain because of the environment you work in. I think this is the intention behind the Future Leaders Fellowship, is for it to be a little bit ambitious and a little bit risky in terms of what it can achieve, and therefore you can, I think it's okay to have a goal that is maybe a little bit ambitious, a little too ambitious perhaps, but be honest with what that means in terms of the constraints and what you might need to do if those risks or those issues come to bear, because the whole point of research is that we don't really know what the outcomes are going to be, and sometimes we have to change direction. So I think making sure that comes across is really important, and I think also trying to talk about you as the individual, sort of the candidate fellow, about what your interests are, about what your leadership style is, and how you plan to influence others, is really important, because I think that gives a flavour. Obviously, in the application process, it gives a flavour of the kind of person that you are, and not just about what it is you want to achieve.
One, use it as an opportunity to think about your own personal and professional goals. What are you passionate about and committed to? I think the application process in itself can be useful in prompting you to think in that way, which it's not always easy to do in the day-to-day of everyday life and work. Second, be clear on what success would look like. So clearly communicate what the impact of the project you're proposing would be if successful. And I think don't be afraid to think ambitiously, and to set a big agenda to work towards. And then finally, for non-academic applicants, don't try to fit into the traditional academic research project mold. I think the FLF provides a unique opportunity to propose work that looks different to a traditional research project, and that's okay. So provided you can make a case for why it's impactful and why what success would look like, I think it doesn't have to fit into what you might think it does based on previous academic experience.
Indeed, it's to really define the problem that you're trying to address in the fellowship. And I think the key there is not to try and confirm what you necessarily believe yourself, but trying to seek some feedback from people who can offer constructive criticism to what your assumptions are, because having a real problem is a strong foundation for the fellowship application, and it will also drive obviously your work for the 4 or 7 years of the program. And the second piece of advice from me, probably from experience right now, is to be able to communicate it well, communicate your the problem you're trying to address really well, because it's not only your understanding what you're trying to achieve, but it's also communication of that to and conveying of that to other people. That really counts in trying to bring them with you on that journey.
So I hope you found that useful, and it was beneficial hearing from our Future Leader Fellows who are currently embarking on the projects and who have been through the application process beforehand. And we were also joined by Antika Mitra from TISIX, who is our other round 3 fellow. So she joined us in the first webinar and also has some really great advice to offer too. So like I said earlier, if you haven't already seen that, I really encourage you to go back and watch that as well. So next, we're going to move on to our panel discussion, where 3 of our Future Leader Fellowships panel members are interviewed by Stephen McComb from the Knowledge Transfer Network, and they reflect on their experience of assessing business applications in previous rounds of the scheme. So just a quick reminder, this is what the assessment criteria is for the scheme. There's 4 individual assessment criteria, and our panelists are going to be referring to each of these in turn, and really talking about how businesses can best demonstrate their competencies against these different criteria. So now we'll watch the video and hear what our panelists had to say.
I'm Nessa Carey. I worked for 15 years in the biotech and pharmaceutical industry. I now run my own business, consulting and training people in innovation. I've been involved with the FLF scheme by chairing two of the panels on the past rounds. I've also chaired panels for BBSRC and MRC, both in basic project-driven work and also in things like collaborative research partnerships.
Thank you. Ben, can you introduce yourself?
Hi there, my name is Ben Johnson. I run a small consultancy called Graphic Science. We specialise in public engagement with research across the board, but primarily that means that we end up working mostly in STEM areas. I've been involved with the FLF programme since the beginning. I no longer sit on panels discussing applications. I now rove between panels listening to other people discuss applications.
Thank you. Peter, would you like to introduce yourself?
Okay, Peter Oakley here. I work for TWI, which is a research and technology organisation in the fields of materials, manufacturing, structural integrity. I got involved in FLF through being on STFC panels, and I've been, like Ben, right from the start. So I've been panel member for SIP panels, and chairing SIP panels and chairing interview panels. So the range right the way through.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, everybody. The way we're going to structure the interviews today is to focus on the 4 different areas which are part of the assessment criteria, which will be available to each of the FLF applicants. So the first of those is research and innovation excellence. We've prepared a separate question just to try and draw out what an assessor might be looking for. So first question then to Nessa, what does a high scoring research and innovation excellence application look like for a business?
So it's got many of the same characteristics as we'd see for an academic application, in that there has to be a really good innovation program, which is addressing an important issue and one where the innovation plan is well thought out and is using technologies or approaches which are the right ones and which often are groundbreaking. We expect to see a clear reason for doing the research. It has to have a rationale behind it. And we expect that in a business context to be appropriate for that particular business. But we also recognize that actually businesses, their commercial perspective may change, and it may change in response to the research. So we don't expect that there has to be a very, very straightforward, simple route to one potential product, because that may not be appropriate for a business. But we expect to see that the application will actually be empowering the business to move into new areas or to expand its operations, in the sense of being able to do cutting edge stuff which is more widely applicable and is a real complementary asset to what's going on in the company at the time. So we expect excellence in terms of the innovation, but we also are aware that where it leads may change during the course of the program.
Okay, so as assessors, you're recognizing that an academic application will have a significant difference to a business?
Yeah, with an academic application, everyone's much more comfortable with academic applications because we're used to the idea of, here's an interesting hypothesis, we're going to start testing it, we're not quite sure where it's going to lead. With a company application, we're much more comfortable with the fact that actually they do know where they want it to be. They're not doing blue skies research, and that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for excellent innovation, but it doesn't have to be blue skies. In fact, we wouldn't expect it to be from a company. We'd expect it to be much more problem oriented.
Okay, that's very reassuring, because quite a number of the questions we've received have been sort of questioned that area, so thank you for that. The second question I'm going to ask then to Peter. What are the common mistakes that businesses put into applications?
Okay, in my experience, the biggest mistake people make, and it is one of the criteria that the panels are looking for, is this really a Future Leader Fellowship program, or is it a project that could be put into a whole range of other funding mechanisms? The FLF program is a unique program. It is that match between developing step-changing technology and step-changing people. And it's a combination of the two. And so I'd suggest people, if you look at your project, your proposal, and you think, well, I could put it into Innovate UK, or I could put it into a locally RDF or an EU project, then it's not a Future Leader Fellowship project. It is something that is uniquely fits with the criteria, and those criteria are very well explained in all the documentation for the program.
Okay, so something that would fit into another program is not appropriate.
It is. It's don't say, well, I could put in this, I could put in for that. Oh, I'll try Future Leader Fellowship. No. Look at what the program's about and say, okay, is there something special that we want to do that fits this program? And that's a combination of person and technology. And that's the unusual thing for industrially based ones, because we are looking, and we'll come on to that later, but we are looking for that combination of person and the innovation as Nessa was describing.
Okay, that's very useful, thank you. And then the third of the questions on this area, through to Ben. What's the difference between a 7 or 8 scoring versus sort of a 9 or a 10 scoring? And what I'm trying to get at there is this difference between a good application, which sort of in theory meets all the criteria, and one which is really outstanding.
Yeah, the very short answer to this is it's in the criteria. And the long and complicated answer is it really is in the criteria. And something I've noticed listening to people at the assessment stage, trying to, you know, where assessors sit side by side with the application and the criteria, and they read the two simultaneously very, very closely. And what falls out of that process very often is that it comes down to the very simple definition of terms. So where we're trying to assess, is this an exceptional application? Then the question becomes, well, what is it an exception to? How is it different to everything else? And if it's an outstanding criterion that we're looking at, then how does it stand out from everything else? And so I think it's a really, really useful way to think about this, to look at your application and think about, well, what is it an exception to? How does it stand out from everything else? And that's actually very hard to do when you're writing it. And I think it's easier to do when you're talking about it. So I would encourage businesses collaborating and with researchers putting together applications to ask each other these questions. What is this exceptional to? What does this stand out from? And have those conversations between yourselves before you write that into your bid.
Okay, that's very useful, because we have kept referring to this outstanding. Quite a number of the questions kept asking us about how do we define outstanding. So is that sort of your, as an assessor, you're sort of specifically looking for that sort of extra bit?
Well, I think the OED have already done the work for us. You know, we just have to make sure that we understand what these words mean and that we can demonstrate that the application actually does fit those criteria, because the assessors will work very, very closely to those criteria.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on then to the second of our assessment criteria. Is around the applicant and their development, so specifically focusing on the person who will be the future leader. And the first question we're going to ask through to Peter is, business applicants are used to focusing on the project and not the person. Have you tips for a strong application, or strong applications that you've seen that have successfully focused on the person?
Yeah, this is the heart of one of the difficulties for business applications, because as the question says, it's business applications are used to focusing on the project, but it's the nature of a Future Leader Fellowship. In the words, we're looking for future leaders, and therefore companies, businesses have to make sure that they have these twin tracks: absolute excellence in the research, the innovation that's being proposed, but the person has to be someone who, they are backing, they are saying that this is a future leader, this is a person who's going to be important to the organization, They're going to be important in their field of technology, but they're also going to be important in that we are developing them a stage further from where they are now. And it's those three things. If it's saying, how is this fellowship going to develop that person in those three areas? And it's not a question of focusing on the person, but it's making sure the person is the right person. And it is not something that the business is going to win and then say, right, well, who's going to do this? It is actually, we think this person is a great potential, and 4 or 7 years of funding is going to really realize that potential and make a step change in them. It's going to make a step change in innovation as well, but you can't have one without the other. And that, to me, is the unique aspect of this program.
Okay, and just in your comments there, you're recognizing that this person may not be fully formed. The process needs to work.
I think there's, if we are talking about fully formed existing leaders, then there's a step beyond that. We're looking for the people who have potential, have demonstrated some potential, but by being awarded a fellowship, they are going to take a big leap forward in their careers, in their development, and in the technology. And so, to me, an important thing is to say, okay, this is where you are now. Where do you expect to be at the end? And that's a question to ask. The company should ask themselves, where do you expect this person to be? And the applicant should be asking themselves, where do I expect to be at the end of the fellowship? And certainly I had one case where someone said, well, I'll just be doing my job. That isn't going to sell it to any of the interview panels.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Moving on then to Ben for the second question. The area of trying to prove evidence is a tricky one for businesses. So how have you seen good applicants show evidence of capabilities without having to refer to research papers, which would be part of more academic measures?
Okay, well, I'm coming at this more from the perspective of the creative industries, I guess. And so a thing that leaps out for me in thinking about that world is that word creative. And if applicants are able to demonstrate that they belong in the creative industries because they do and are producing creative work. And one thing that the creative industries are really fond of is things like awards, of course. And so I think it's really important that you can demonstrate some evidence of kind of thought leadership within your sector, and that you're already well regarded, that you're already doing things that make people sit up and like, maybe we should be doing something more like that. We should be learning from the way these guys are working. And that should be applicable across lots of different sectors. So whether you're using logic models in your planning, whether you're using different kinds of tools or theoretical framings in order to understand the work that you're doing and the impact that you're having in society, which ultimately is meant to generate some kind of profit for the company, then if you're good at that kind of stuff and you're appropriate for FLF, then you should be able to evidence that without too much difficulty. I think it's the form, as much as anything, does kind of drive people to think in terms of research papers and other kinds of academic outputs, but there is scope to show off your work and what you do best.
Okay, so early evidence of leadership and capability, which can then be grown in the future, that sort of thing? Okay, excellent, thank you. And then Nessa, for the third of these questions, understand that the research landscape is mentioned. What would you look for in an application around the sort of the research landscape?
What we're looking for is an applicant who can demonstrate that they know what's happening in the wider research environment in their sector, and then not just thinking about what's going on in their company or their organization. So we'd like them to tell us what else is happening out there in the world that's relevant to the problem that they're addressing. And it's a good opportunity as well to sneak in yet more information about why what you're doing will be better than what's going on outside. Sometimes we find applicants are a little bit nervous about engaging with this because they think what they'll be doing is flagging up to us that there is competition. If this is a genuine FLF application, we would always expect the applicant to be working in a competitive field. That's where we expect the leaders to emerge. So don't be shy about telling us about other things that are going on in other organizations that are relevant. Just flag those up so that we know you understand, and make sure you tell us why what you're doing is different or better.
Excellent, thank you very much. So moving on then to the third of the areas for assessment is around impact and strategic relevance. Nessa, again, I'll pick your brains for this one. If the research is at an early stage, how can we best show impact from that research?
So we expect that the research that's happening in businesses, however we want to define those, is research which is aimed at solving business problems. And so we would expect you to be able to demonstrate that there is a potential need for what it is that you're creating, what you're innovating in. Now, we recognise that that can be very difficult for early innovations, but we do want to see that there is a route to getting these implemented, that you've thought about this, and that you understand where some of the hurdles are as well as some of the opportunities.
Okay, excellent. And then for the second of the questions, I'm going to ask Peter. Profits and markets will be very much an unknown when we look at future business, and our current business climate highlights that. So what should an applicant do about trying to showcase the numbers that are potential, and how do they present a credible case where they're just not making up random numbers, but something which is believable to the assessors?
Well, certainly I would countenance against making up random numbers, because they will pretty well rapidly be destroyed in the peer review and the sifting process. But I don't agree with the start of that question. I don't think profits and markets are going to be unknown, because what we're asking is not only the UKRI are going to invest in this person and their career and their development, but a company is going to, an industrial company, a research organisation are needing to play their part in that investment. And I cannot believe that an industrial company would be willing to make that investment without saying, I know why I'm doing it. So profits and markets will be known. They may be in the distance, they may be in the shorter term. They need to be understood, and it could be that there is a very wide scope for the future benefits, or it could be a very focused scope for the future benefits. It could be in the short term, medium or long term. But part of preparing a good application is showing that you understand why you are doing the work. And it could even be things like the government grand challenges, that this is all part of that. So, as I said, a little bit of research outside of the normal technical side. It needn't be huge in content, but it needs to be quite incisive, and there needs to be a few killer facts that actually makes you believe that the applicants understand why they're doing this. I think a bit earlier we talked about that there could be a very wide topic rather than a focused academic topic, and in that case these profits and markets may be a much more strategic answer, both for the company and for the commercial environment. But again, a believable case. I think Ben said earlier, testing these cases before you put the application in is quite important, and talking to your colleagues, talking to your bosses, talking to, it could be customers, in understanding exactly why this is being done. And I think an important caveat to make for UKRI is that these things, these applications are treated with high levels of confidentiality. And therefore, any industrial company should not be concerned about putting what they may consider confidential data into an application. We all sworn to absolute secrecy, and it is part of that assessment process.
So you talked about believable numbers, so I suppose in an internal company, would that be similar to what's presented to VCs or finance directors as part of decision making?
Yeah, it's a very open question, and there's a whole range of answers. But I think it's from the people doing the peer review, the sifting, the interviews, it's making sure that there is something there that they can look at and say the applicant understands why they're doing this from a more commercial rather than technical point of view. They understand the landscape in which they're working, and they're making that part of their case for the funding.
Excellent, thank you very much. Moving on to the fourth of the areas from the assessment process is around research and innovation environment and the costs. So the first question I'm going to ask through to Ben, this is an unfamiliar question for many businesses. What would you say is the things that businesses often have that don't articulate well in an application, and what evidence can they present to support this?
Okay, so this is an interesting question, and it's a really great opportunity, I think, if you're the kind of business where the sort of research and innovation that FLF is there to support can flourish, then this is a really, this should be an open goal for you, I think. So thinking about this from the point of view of, you know, my own company working in the creative industries, this really comes down a lot to the kinds of support and the infrastructure that's in place within the business. And that's not things as simple as kind of cycle to work schemes, or the fact that, you know, you give people long holidays and stuff like that. It's actually the way the company structures its thinking and working. It's the whole company ethos that builds an environment which is conducive to the kind of work that we're trying to support through FLF.
So where have the applicants been weakest in describing this area?
I think applicants have been weak in describing this area when they haven't taken a step back to think about their own business, their own working environment objectively. We all get very used to everything that's around us, and we assume that what we have is quite typical. And actually it may be that in your working environment you have real advantages that you don't think to articulate. So it might be that a company has access to amazing equipment that isn't routine in the sector. You also probably have things like a much better understanding of routes to impact, routes to the market, mechanisms for being able to engage with potential customers so that you can do prototype testing, so that you can have a much more rapid refinement of your innovation, and so that you can keep improving it really quickly in a way that means it will actually reach the marketplace and serve some sort of need. So it's important to take that step back and actually think objectively. And I find that a lot of companies are quite weak at doing this, and then they're often weak at explaining about things like how they engage with, say, their local innovation ecosystem. Again, they don't think about talking about this enough. So I would urge applicants to make sure that they really take that step back and take that objective view.
So I hope you found that a useful discussion to listen to, and that it gave you a better idea of the types of things that some of our panellists expect to see in an application. And these panellists have seen quite literally hundreds and hundreds of applications by this point. So I would really encourage you to listen very carefully to some of the comments that they made in that discussion. So now we'll move on to the how-to section of this webinar. So looking very practically at what you need to do to submit an application to this scheme. So there are 4 sections here, but we'll start with how to register and navigate the GES system. Now, some of you may be familiar with this system, but for the purposes of this section, we'll assume that you aren't familiar with this system at all. And there's going to be a huge amount of information coming up here. So we don't expect you to leave today's webinar having remembered everything that we say. This will be recorded, or this is being recorded, and a recording will be circulated to you. So you can by all means revisit this, pause, work on a section, and then hear the next bit that we have to say. So the GES application system. You'll need an account on this system in order to submit an application to the Future Leader Fellowship Scheme. And there's 2 parts that you need to do to be able to submit that application. The organisation needs to be registered on the system, so that's the host, and in this case, the business. And you, as the potential Future Leader Fellow, also need a personal account for you as the applicant. So this is what you'll see when you land on the GES homepage, and there's a link right there at the bottom. And again, we'll circulate this with you to you and make sure you have all these links. But if you click where the big yellow arrow is pointing, you'll get a self-registration for organisations button.
And by clicking on that, you'll then be taken to this page. There's some terms and conditions, which I haven't put up here, but there's some very basic terms and conditions attached to the system. Then you'll need to submit some details, some high-level details about the organisation, and that's all you need to do. And then the organisation is registered on the system, and that's all you need to do to create that part of the account. And once you've created the organisation, you should return to the home page, and then you can create an account for yourself as the applicant. So again, if you click where the big yellow arrow is pointing, create an account, you'll have an option to create an account, a personal account for yourself as the applicant. And once you've put in some very basic information, so your name, etc., you'll reach this page and you'll get asked why you want a Jez account. And if the sole reason behind you creating this account is to submit an application to the Future Leader Fellowship Scheme, then you just need to tick where the yellow arrow is pointing, applicant on a fellowship proposal, and that's all you need to do here. Then you'll reach this. So this is where you link your personal account, your applicant account, to the organisation that you've potentially just registered. So if you click on select organisation, it will have a list of every business, every organisation registered on the Jez system, and you can find the right organisation for you. And then you can also select a department. Now, if you're a very large organisation, you might want to set up multiple departments, particularly if you're expecting to use this account a lot and put in multiple applications to the scheme. But if you're a small or medium company and you don't have departments, you just need to write something to fill this box. So main department or unlisted would be absolutely fine. And please be aware that if you create the account for the organisation, it might not show up immediately. So it might be worth creating the account for the organisation and giving it 24 hours or so before you come back to create an account as the applicant. So once you've done that, you've registered the organisation, you've registered yourself as the applicant, you're ready to actually start the application. So you need to be logged into the system, and then on this bar on the left-hand side, you'll see documents, again, where the big yellow arrow is pointing. And from there, you'll get taken to this page. And if you want to create a new application to the Future Leader Fellowship Scheme, and this is the first time you've logged into the system, you want to click on New Document at the top. Or if you're already midway through an application and you want to come back and revisit it and add more, keep working on it, then you need to click below where it says existing. And just to stay here, this is an existing proposal within the same round. So if you've applied to a previous round of the scheme, round 4, round 5, that won't show up here. You'll need to create a new application for round 6, this round of the scheme. And then this is how you actually create, once you've clicked on New Document, this is how you actually create your outline or your full application. So you'll need to fill in all of these boxes exactly as shown here. In the first box at the top, select Council, you will need to select MRC or Medical Research Council. Now, I can't reiterate this enough. This is purely a workaround on the system for us. It does not demonstrate that we're looking for applications in the medical field or that there's any preference for these applications at all. It's purely a workaround on the system. So please don't be concerned about selecting the Medical Research Council there or having Medical Research Council logo later on. Like I say, no, it doesn't indicate any preference whatsoever for applications from the medical area. Then select document type. So on the left-hand side, this box shows what you need to do to submit an outline proposal to the scheme. Applications are in 2 parts, outline proposals and full applications. And so to submit an outline proposal, you need select council, MRC, select document type, outline proposal, select scheme, obviously the UKRI Future Leader Fellowship Scheme, but you need to make sure that it says outline here, again, where that big yellow arrow is pointing. And then in the 4th and final box, select call/type/mode. That will then give you this round 6 of the scheme. The reason there's nothing in that box at the moment is because outlines don't open until the 10th of November and full applications don't open until the 3rd of December. So once those dates are passed, you will be able to select outline and full application in that box. The reason that we're doing this now is we want to give you all this information up front. We encourage you to still set up a JES account as early as possible, and we want you to start working on the content of your application before the system opens to give you as much time as possible. And so then just before I move on, the right-hand box here tells you how to start a full application. So once you've submitted your outline, you'll need to log back in to submit a full application. So again, you need to create a new document. You need MRC as your main counsel, fellowship proposal as the document, and then UKRI Future Leader Fellowships again as the scheme. And again, that fourth box, you can't input anything into that at the moment, but once it's been the 3rd of December, that will be open for you to select the next round. So now we'll talk a bit more about both of those things, the outline proposal and the full application, and what that actually entails and how you can work on each section to make it as strong as possible. But I did just want to talk you through that system so that those of you who hadn't used the system before and weren't familiar with it could revisit that section of the webinar, work through and set up an account, hopefully without any issues. We will also circulate the email address that you can contact if for any reason you are struggling to use that system. But now onto the outline proposal. So you must submit an outline proposal if you're interested in submitting a full application to the Future Leader Fellowship Scheme. It's a mandatory stage. However, it's not assessed and you won't receive feedback from UKRI. So please don't wait on feedback from us on your outline proposal. So an outline proposal, what information do you need to give us at this stage? Well, it's very light touch compared to the full application. We need you to tell us everything in the left-hand box here. So we want some project details, the organisation, so the business where this will be hosted, potentially the department if that's applicable, grant reference, which will be given to you when you set up the document, and project title. So really high-level information. We need the applicant name, so you as the potential Future Leader Fellow, your name, co-investigators. Now, we'll come on to these a bit later as well, but this is a very academic term, so some of you might be familiar with it, others of you might not be familiar with it. But this is just people who have a particular expertise who will be helping and supporting you for a part of the fellowship. They're not mandatory, but if you have them, they are a part of your fellowship and you know who they are by the time you submit an outline proposal, then do put their names in there. But if you don't know who they are or you're not 100% sure by the time you submit an outline proposal, then it doesn't matter, you can just leave that section blank. We need to know project partners as well, so people who, other organisations, people who will be involved in your application. Objectives, so some overarching high-level objectives for your outline proposal, and these can change between the outline proposal and the main application. So please don't worry too much about having these perfected to the letter. Just give us a broad indication of the area that you'll be working in and the overarching objectives of this piece of work or your fellowship portfolio. Research Council or Innovate UK relevance. If you're a business hosted application, I would suggest putting Innovate UK here. It helps us for internal management. It's just a tick box part of the application. Don't worry too much about it. And then a summary. So again, giving us an indication of the area that you'll be working in and what a kind of summary of the 4 years of work. And you'll also need to attach a cover letter to your outline proposal, but only if your total costs of the fellowship are over 1.5 million and a justification of why the costs exceed 1.5 million. And also if you want to come in as a reduced hours fellowship. And again, a short justification against that. And we talked about this in the first webinar, so as Abby said, please revisit that if you want more information. But a reduced hours fellowship exists so that applicants at business hosts don't have to spend 100% of their working time on the fellowship. They can spend a minimum of 60% of their working time on the fellowship and up to the remaining 40% on other business activities. But there needs to be a justification as to why the other business activities are still really important to the development of this individual and the innovation. So if they're spending kind of the other 40% of their time on very menial tasks, envelope stuffing, etc., that's probably not going to really strengthen their application. But if they're spending that other up to 40% of their time on really crucial projects to the business that help the individual stay linked into the overall strategy of the business, make sure that they have a really clear understanding and direction of where the business is going, that type of thing, then that could be a really strong link between the other work and the time spent on the fellowship. So again, we talk about that more in our first webinar if you want more detail, but you will need to talk about that and give a small justification in the cover letter to the outline. And the outline's open on the 10th of November, so in a couple of weeks' time, and then they close on the 10th of December. So you have a month in which to submit that outline proposal. And to reiterate, it's mandatory, but you won't hear anything back from UKRI. So please don't wait once you've submitted the outline to start working on your full application. We need it for internal management purposes, so we have an idea of the number coming in, so that we can offer you extra support and so that we can get one of our expert panelists, etc., lined up to assess your application. So moving on to our second how-to section, this is the big section, submitting a full application. And again, there's a huge amount of detail here and a lot on the slide, so I'll go through it, but you will be able to revisit this and come back to this at a later date and when working on your application. So the full application is made up of two parts. There's an application form on JES with some questions that you need to answer. And there's also attachments. And attachments, I don't think is the best name for them because it makes them sound secondary, but they're not. They're absolutely integral to putting together a really strong application. So because of the importance of attachments, we're actually going to start here talking about the attachments, and then we'll come back to the JES form later on in this section. So this is a table of attachments that we ask for when you're applying to this scheme. And some of them have templates, but many of them are free form. So it's really about building, like Abby said, building an application with a really strong narrative against each of those 4 assessment criteria. The main attachment is the case for support, and this is what we'll spend the most time looking at because it really is the most important document to a high quality application. But we'll also talk through some other documents. So a CV where there's a specific template for you to complete, a justification of the finances that you're requesting, a data management plan, which will vary in importance depending on the nature of your application, a supporting statement from the senior business individual, which again is a really important part of the application. The finance form, very important because that's where you need to tell us all the money that you would like. And if it's not in that form, then we're unable to give you those funds. A work plan, and then some supporting statements from collaborators, project partners, and mentors. So we'll go through all of these in a little bit more detail now. And like I said, the case for support is the key one here. It's really critical to a strong application. It should be used to describe the plans for the fellowship, but it should really clearly come back to each of the 4 assessment criteria and make sure that what you're putting forward is strong across all 4 of the criteria. An application which is only strong against 2 or 3 is very unlikely to be competitive. So the case for support, the research and innovation excellence is one of the 4 assessment criteria. And here we really want to hear about original and ambitious plans to demonstrate excellence in innovation. As some of our panelists touched on in that conversation, we want you to think about kind of what's feasible and some risk mitigation. Risk is not a bad thing, but if it exists, we want to know that you've thought about it, you have different ways of approaching it, and if applicable, you have contingency plans as well. What are the gains in the short, medium, and long term? What will be achieved in the fellowship, and what's potential and impact and innovation excellence beyond the fellowship? If there are multiple projects, if your fellowship is more of a portfolio approach rather than one kind of research project or innovation project for the whole 4 years, how are they linked? What are the overarching objectives? Really use this section to paint a picture of that. If applicable, and obviously this will only be applicable to certain applications, human or animal studies, make sure that you're talking about those and the kind of care and due diligence you've taken to put those together. And references, this might not be applicable for everything, but if you're quoting kind of key stats or you're building something off a published piece of work, make sure that you reference it here because it just helps to strengthen that application. And we'll talk about IP again a little bit further on in the presentation as well, but make sure that you've thought about IP. Impact and strategic relevance, so the second of our 4 main criteria. So impact, why does this need to be addressed? And it can't just be benefits for the business, it has to be beyond the business. So how does it benefit, impact work in the sector, the UK, or potentially even further afield? How will this enable future economic success in the UK or contribution to key societal challenges? What's the scale of the impact? Again, if you wish, you can talk about the impact during the fellowship, but also potential impacts after the duration of the fellowship as well. Make sure that you're aware of other emerging work in the area and make sure you can articulate kind of how either how you stand out or your awareness of this other work and create a really unique space for you to be working in. And again, they're not mandatory, but if you have references that help back up what you're saying, then definitely include them to strengthen your case for support. The third of our 4 criteria, the applicant and their development, which is absolutely integral to a fellowship. How do you inspire and lead others and build new relationships or influence in the area or the sector that you're working in? Is there a really clear and well-resourced plan to develop yourself as the applicant and, if applicable to your fellowship, develop the team around you as well? Do you have the skills, knowledge and experience to take this on? We're looking for future leaders, people with a huge amount of potential, but as well as demonstrating that potential, you need to demonstrate that you can kind of competently take on a project of this scale and size and really excel your own career trajectory and development during that time. So make sure that comes across really strongly. And if you have a plan to secure guidance or mentoring, support, make sure that that's really well articulated and you've thought about the people and the skills around you. And the case for support, when you read our guidance, it also says to mention the career intentions. And so how will this fellowship have a really clear impact on your career trajectory? Outline shorter and longer term career intentions. What can you achieve in this fellowship? What will this fellowship get you closer towards? But also, where will you end up longer term because of this fellowship? And again, if you wish to carry out this fellowship on a reduced hours basis, so spending some of your time working on the fellowship, but some of your time on business as usual activities, demonstrate how the two dovetail well together and how it paints an even better package, more than the sum of its 2 parts for your career development. And then finally, our 4th assessment criteria that we want to talk about in the case for support, the research and innovation environment. So this could be the business host. So why is the business the best place for you to be as an applicant? And this can vary massively, and it will vary massively depending on the organisation. And as with all of this, there's no right or wrong answer. It's about really pulling out the strengths of the business. Do you have excellent international links? Are you world leading in this particular area of research and innovation? Do you have excellent supply chain connectivity, which means you can do something quite different to your competitors? Whatever it is, make sure that you can articulate it really well. Make sure that you have leadership buy-in from senior figures in the host organisation's business. Make sure that they're fully behind not only the body of work, but you as the potential applicant, the potential future leader fellow. Make sure that they're supporting you. Make sure that they're offering and demonstrating that support with more than just words. So how are they going to support you as the applicant throughout the fellowship? What support can they offer you? And that can be very tangible support, like training courses, but it can also be much less tangible. It can be kind of conversations, checking in with you, helping you to source mentorship, a whole variety of different things. And again, it's about identifying what is really crucial to you as the applicant and to your career trajectory and making sure that it's personalised. And I said I'd come back to intellectual property, and I thought I'd put this in the category about the host organisation. So is the generation of IP expected? It's not crucial. Fellowships exist, excellent fellowships exist without the generation of IP. But if you do expect IP to be generated, then you can talk about that in your application as the impact that this fellowship will create, and think about how you will protect any potential IP and also how you'll exploit it for the maximum benefit of the UK, the organisation, and also wider society. And I just want to say here, because it's a question that we get asked all the time, and I can see some questions popping up, and I'm sure this is amongst them, is will UKRI own any of the IP? Absolutely not. The IP remains with the host organisation, the business. So whatever your contract is as an organisation and the person that you employ, UKRI won't do anything to supersede that. So if your employment contract with an individual says that the organisation will retain all IP, then that will still stand. Obviously, if you develop a collaboration, you may wish to give away some of your IP as part of the collaboration agreement. But again, that's all down to you to come to an agreement that works for everyone. UKRI would never mandate what you do in that situation. And I hope you don't mind a slightly tongue-in-cheek slide here, but I just wanted to end the focus on the case for support by showing these two very different looking case for supports. We expect the case for support to look something like the one on the left, to be densely packed with information, to comprehensively cover all 4 assessment criteria. And again, it's a deliberately free-form documentation, so you don't have to answer it as a series of questions. You can build a picture that best supports, best demonstrates the potential of the applicant, the organisation, and of course this research and innovation itself. Diagrams and figures are welcome if you want to include them, but you don't have to. We do not expect the case for support to look like the one on the right-hand side. And we do get case for supports in that look like this, with very, very little detail and images that aren't particularly relevant to what you're proposing. And obviously, a long case for support, a detailed case for support, doesn't necessarily mean it's of higher quality. There is an 8-page limit here, and you don't have to submit something that's 8 pages long. But if you submit something that's 2 or 3 or even 4 pages long, it's unlikely that you're giving the assessors the level of detail they need to make a fair assessment on your application. So please do really put in the effort to build up a very detailed case for support. So I'll move on and work through some of the other attachments. I'll go through these quite quickly because, like I said, there's a lot of writing on the screen and you'll be able to come back to these as you work through your application. So the CV, as with any CV, it needs to paint a picture of your achievements and what you've done to date. But there is a template here. It's a fairly standard template. Please delete any sections that aren't applicable to you. For example, there's a section that asked about PhDs. If you have a PhD, obviously put that information in. If you don't have one, you don't need a PhD, you can just get rid of that section. And make sure that you include outputs here as well. And again, outputs will be different depending on the area that you work in your experience. But if there's anything very tangible, like some of the things listed here, I would suggest you include that in your CV. But also talk about it in the application and development section of the case for support too. Then the justification of resources. So this is about justifying the money that you're asking for. So what funds do you need to make the project a success? And make sure you're justifying value for money, but please don't scrimp just to lower the cost slightly. That we want to see applications that are asking for the right amount of money to make sure that they can achieve their objectives and aims. So please don't ask for much more than you need. We will do financial checks, and if we don't think it's suitable for what you're asking for, then you won't be awarded those funds. Equally, please don't scrimp and save every single penny that leaves you in a position where actually then you don't have enough money to achieve your objectives. So a bit of a Goldilocks approach here is just about getting it just right. Please include ethical and risk consideration here. If you're asking for a certain amount of animals to do some work, then please justify that. Again, I realise that will be only applicable to certain applications, but if that's you, please include it. Please make sure that costs are eligible according to the scheme guidance. Our guidance is hugely detailed and it takes you through what you do, what you can and cannot ask for. So please check against those and make sure that you match each cost category against the categories in the finance form, because it just means it's really easy for the assessors to match up. Okay, they've asked for this amount in this section. Here's a paragraph that justifies that really nicely. Excellent. I can move on. So that just makes life really nice and easy for our assessors. Data management plan. This, like I said at the start, will vary in importance depending on the nature of your project. If there's a project where you'll be gathering a substantial volume of data, particularly if it's particularly sensitive or personal data, you'll need a plan in place to deal with that, to make sure that it adheres to GDPR, that you're sharing it in the right way if you do wish to share it, etc., etc. If you don't plan to generate or store any data, please still complete this, but a couple of lines is absolutely fine. So then moving on to the supporting statement, and I can see a question on this as well. So the supporting statement must be written by a senior individual from the business, and it should cover the applicant's suitability to undertake the award, the suitability of the project as a whole for the training and career development of the applicant, why the business is the right place for this work to take place, and outline any commitments that the business will make to mentor and support the applicant and support the fellowship as a whole. And it should also include the financial contribution here. So this statement needs to be written by someone who can sign off the financial contribution that the business will be making to this fellowship. And for a smaller company where the most senior person is potentially the applicant, then it will have to be the same individual that submits the supporting statement confirming budgetary authority. So if you're the CEO of a small organisation and you're the applicant, then you can sign off the budgetary authority there. Equally, if you have, a chief financial officer or someone who's in that role, they could do it too. So it's about highlighting the most suitable person in your organisation. Then the finance form for business applicants. These are the sections that are included there. And like I've touched on, please ask for the funds that you need to really see this fellowship kind of come to life, for you to achieve your career ambitions and to achieve the objectives of the research and innovation as well. And anything that you wish to receive from the fellowship should go in this section. We can't award any money later on that isn't asked for. We can move monies around cost categories, that's okay, but the total that you put when you submit your application, we can't change that total. So please ask for everything that you think you might need to complete the fellowship up front. And with that, I very quickly wanted to touch on state aid. So the amount of money that the business will need to contribute will vary depending on the size of the organisation, but also the type of work that you're carrying out. So if you're doing fundamental research, regardless of the size of the organisation, you can receive 100% of the money from UKRI. But if the work you're doing is much closer to commercialisation, then you'll receive less from UKRI, and that also decreases as the organisation gets larger. So again, there's a link here, and we can circulate this afterwards with much more information on what this means for your project and some definitions for each of these categories as well. But just to give you a kind of a feel for the amount of money that you might have to contribute as the business host. So nearly through the attachments, the next one is the work plan. The work plan should be a standalone document with specific timelines and milestones, and any form is acceptable. If your organisation typically approaches work plans in a certain way, then that's absolutely fine for this purpose. The page limit is 1 A4 page, so please use that as an indicator of the level of detail to provide. Please don't do a very, very comprehensive work plan and shrink it down so small that it can't actually be read. Please make sure that the work plan you present can be read on an A4 piece of paper. And then I'll end this section with supporting statements. So supporting statements can be from collaborators or project partners and or mentors. They should only be from people with defined roles. They shouldn't be just from anyone who's met you or thinks this work is really strong. It has to be from someone with a defined role in the fellowship. So a collaborator, the types of things, and again, this is really just an indication, but the types of things you might want to include here, you could confirm the role of the collaborating organisation, ask them to talk about the value of the work, ask them to talk about the deliverables that they'll work on and be responsible with, ask them to articulate their support for the fellow, the individual applicant, and the team working with them, and talk about the contribution or any costs that they want to make. For project partners, we'd ask them to talk about the kind of in-kind or monetary support that they're offering and the value of the work. So again, just getting them to kind of reiterate why they think this work is important, the impact it will have, and why they think that this applicant is the right person to take this on as well. And mentors, you can have more than one named mentor. And from the mentors, we really want to hear more on the personal side. So the commitment to support you as the applicant and your career trajectory and personal development and how they will help and assist with that. And for all of these supporting statements, please make sure to show their validity, make sure that they're signed and dated to show that they're specific to this Future Leader Fellowships application. So I'm aware that we've reached Q1. I'm going to keep going because there's a huge amount of information that we want to share with you, and I can see a lot of questions coming in that I want to make sure we have time to get to as well. If you do need to go and have other commitments, apologies that we've run over, please do leave and we'll make sure to follow up with a recording, but otherwise I'll keep working through what we wanted to share with you today. So this is an attachment that might be applicable to some applicants. You will need to submit a cover letter to your full application, but only under these circumstances. So if the applicant has submitted a previous application to the scheme, if this is a resubmission, you'll need to address that in the cover letter and the changes you've made since that previous application. If you're requesting funds or total project costs over 1.5 million, you'll need to write a little bit about that with a short justification. If you intend to hold a fellowship on a reduced hours basis, again, please highlight that in a cover letter. And also if you wish to name conflicted experts or organisations that you want to request we don't approach for a review. And you'll have heard Peter talking in the panel discussion about the confidentiality of the process. All our assessors and reviewers are made to sign a confidentiality agreement and they do not see anything without having signed that agreement. However, if you do want to indicate to us that there are specific people, specific organisations, then you can do that in your cover letter as well as an extra level of kind of due diligence and care there. And so now I'll take you through the GES application form. So all of that information was about the attachments, and that's the bit that you can start working on now before starting your application in GES. But the GES application form, once you're logged in following the instructions we've already shared with you, you will see this information. So you need to work through this panel on the left-hand side. And again, I'll very quickly take you through each of those and the right types of things to write in those sections. And then right at the bottom here, you'll see attachments, and that's where you need to attach all of those things that I've just taken you through, all of those attachments. So in the application form itself, again, a lot of this is filling in some basic information with a couple of slightly longer sections. So you need project details, very, very simple, organisation, department, project title, etc. The name of you as the main applicant, the salary you wish to receive, but make sure you also put this in the finance form, how much time you want to spend on the project, and if you do have those co-investigators, their names as well, although that's not mandatory like we've said. Your objectives, so please do focus on this section, make sure that the really clear objectives are written here. The assessors will see this part of the application. The summary as well, but this is a very simplified description of the research and innovation intended for a public audience. Beneficiaries, so who will benefit from this research and innovation and how will they benefit? Relevant to UKRI as an organisation or Innovate UK. So you can list the keywords and themes and strategic areas If you don't align with one of the UKRI or Innovate UK strategic areas, that is absolutely fine. It's not part of our assessment criteria. Again, it gives us a good overview of the area that your project is in, fellowship is in, and it means that we can easily find the right people to review your application. Impact summary, again, what do you think the impact of this work will be? And this is also for a public audience. And the 2 sections that are for public audiences will only be published if you're successful in securing a fellowship. Otherwise, they won't be publicly shared. Resource summary, you don't need to list resources here. You can put them all in the finance form for business applicants template. We don't want you to have to duplicate things. So getting that finance form for business applicant template filled in correctly is the most important thing. Other support, so details of any financial support that you've received for this research and innovation in the past 3 years. And that just helps us show or understand if it's been supported before. You can use it to kind of demonstrate that you've already received funding to build this in the earliest stages, and now you wish to take this to the next level through this funding, etc. And related proposals. So this only needs to be filled in if you've already submitted to UKRI to fund the same or similar research and innovation. If you haven't, then you can leave that bit blank. The staff and resources, again, you don't need to fill these sections in. This is important that you put it in the finance form for business applicants. You don't need to worry about putting it in this GES section. And then the final stage of the GES application form. So the estate and indirect costs, again, you don't need to cost anything here. The finance form for business applicants has been created so that you can put a lot of this information in one place, and it will also calculate the contribution that you need to add as a business. GES doesn't calculate this correctly. It calculates it assuming that you're an academic host, a university. So please don't worry about putting this information in the GES application form. Just put it all in the finance form for business applicants as you would like to receive it. Project partners, so details of any individuals or organizations that will make contributions to the project. Classifications, so keywords. There's also some questions here, again, if you're using you're doing human studies or animal studies, but again, they won't be applicable to all. And then finally, reviewers. So suggesting individuals with the expertise to review your application. I would recommend that you suggest some reviewers here. We won't necessarily use them, but it helps give us an idea of the types of people, the types of organizations they work in that you think are best placed to make a really good assessment of your application. So we'd really encourage you to suggest a few names or organizations in that section. And then I just wanted to end this section with some key dates. So to reiterate, GES opens for outline proposals on the 10th of November and closes on the 10th of December. And then it opens for full applications on the 3rd of December, right through to the 19th of January. So how to respond to reviewers? I will take 1 minute to do this, and then we will move on to the question and answer because I can see a lot coming in. So this is a section that's later on in the application process, once you've submitted a full application. But we wanted to give you a heads up now because we probably won't be able to communicate with you before this stage. So at this point, your application will have come into us and you will have received reviews back. Before your application and those reviews go to a shortlisting meeting to decide whether or not you'll be taken to interview, you have a chance to respond to those reviews. And we'd encourage you to go about this as positively as you can. It's never easy to receive criticism of something that you've worked on and an application that you spent this much time developing. But make sure that you're responding, it's a written response, responding to those comments as professionally and positively as you can. You can include new information if you want, but we'd ask you to address all the comments one by one, be clear and concise. So if the review says, for example, this was strong, but actually I felt like the applicant didn't put across a really clear development plan for themselves and their team. Even if you think you have done, this is the opportunity to say, okay, well, maybe that didn't come across as well as I intended, and this is my opportunity to add more information in. So use it to add to your application, and a really positive and robust response really does help the panelists make their decision as to whether or not your application should go to interview. So again, apologies for going over. We have a question and answer session now. So we'll work through some of the questions that you have submitted. So we ask for questions when you registered. And then if there are any questions that we haven't answered in this section that have come in live while I've been talking, we can go through those as well. So questions on the outline proposals that we get asked a lot. What do you expect to see in an outline proposal, objectives and summary? So we expect to see a couple of clear objectives, what you want to achieve with the work, but they don't have to be perfected to the letter. They can be a kind of general overview of what you're looking to achieve. Is there any flexibility to change direction between the outline proposal and the full application? So yes, there is flexibility to change. We wouldn't expect that you completely change the area that you're working in, or change sector, but there's considerable flexibility to change your outline of your fellowship, add new objectives, slightly change the direction, etc. So please don't be tied by anything that you've put in your outline proposal. And do we need to have all the collaborators mentioned when we submit an outline proposal? No, you do not. If you definitely are going to work with a collaborator, you know who they are, then by all means put them in your outline proposal. But if you're not sure and you want more time to work those relationships up, then you don't need to put any collaborators in your outline proposal whatsoever. So Abby, if you're still here after all my talking, would you like to take the next set of questions?
Yeah, thank you, Gabrielle. So a couple of questions now around the full applications. So do you have examples you can share of successful applications? We don't share the successful applications due to confidentiality, but you can see on the website a list of the projects that we have funded so far from across business and academia. So you can take a look at those. And we will also be publishing on the Innovate UK website some case studies and interviews with the successful Round 3 fellows that you heard from earlier. So if you want to hear a bit more about what their projects entail and some reflections on the fellowship scheme, then that would be a really good place to start. And then secondly, if a patent is in the process of filing, how could you highlight that you've contributed to a significant work? So I think the first thing to say is remembering back to earlier on in the presentation, it's not just about patents and publications. You can demonstrate your success through a number of different means, whether or not that is something more traditionally in the academic space or something much more commercial like a product, or the less tangible things like processes and methodologies. So I think my advice to you would be just really think about what you would want to highlight on your CV and on your LinkedIn page, what you're most proud of in your career to date, and then really make sure that shines through in your application form to demonstrate your contributions and your potential as a Future Leader Fellow.
Thanks, Abby. And then I'll take some that we commonly get asked about collaborations, and I can see lots of these in the Q&A box as well. So what's the difference between collaborators and project partners? The key difference really is what they can receive. So a collaborator can receive money from UKRI, and they'd also be expected to contribute money in line with state aid. But a project partner is someone who's offering support, whether that's kind of in kind or financial, or offering to carry out kind of certain work or services, but they're not expecting to receive money. So I wouldn't worry too much about the definitions. I would make sure that you are building the relationship with another organisation that's suitable for the project, and then we can figure out what the right label is for that person. But please don't let any kind of constraints in one or the other affect how you work up those relationships with other organisations that you want to be part of the fellowship. How can I bridge collaboration with academia while applying as a research and development organisation? So a research and development organisation to me could be a number of different things. But in terms of bridging collaboration with academia, firstly, collaboration isn't mandatory, either business to business or academia to business or academia to academia, or even with public and other third sectors. It's not mandatory, but if you do want it as part of the fellowship, and it does quite often strengthen a lot of fellowships, it's really up to you to reach out and build those collaborations. It's not something that UKRI can really facilitate or matchmake through this scheme. It's about building those collaborations and reaching out to people that you want to work with. So the third one here, do you need a formal agreement within the application that shows partners or supporting organisations are definitely on board if the application is successful? So at the point of application, we need those supporting statements that I talked about. So we will need a headed letter covering the topics that I mentioned and signed by someone at that partner or supporting organisation. But we don't need any kind of formal collaboration agreement at the point of application. If you're successful, then we can support you in working that up and making sure that all the right documentation is there. So to apply, just those supporting statements is what we need. And then the final one we got asked when you were registering was, can we make changes with collaborators after the fellowship has started? And to this, I would say yes, you absolutely can. The most important thing to UKRI is that during the fellowship, we help you achieve the objectives of your fellowship, both the research and innovation and the impact, but also supporting your own career trajectory as well. So if a change to a collaborator would have a positive impact, then yes, you can make changes. You can also design the fellowship so that you start collaborating with someone in year 2 or year 3. It doesn't have to be a collaboration that exists from day one. So there is flexibility there. So I wanted to end with a few questions, but I'm very conscious that we've already run over by about 15 minutes and we've told you a huge volume of information in the last hour and a half, not only from us, but also from some of our successful fellows that we've awarded fellowships to, and from some of our assessors as well. So I think we've covered a lot in that question and answer session. We've covered a lot of the main themes that have come up in the chat. But if you have any questions, particularly ones that are very specific to your application, then please do contact us at this address, fellows@ukri.org, and we'll be able to pick up your questions and answer them there. We will also follow up this webinar with a recording of today, a recording of our previous webinar that was more introductory to the scheme a couple of weeks ago, and the guidance and the documents and the links that we've mentioned today so that you have everything in one place. So with that, I'll say thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you found it valuable. I hope you have a lot more information about the scheme. And if you are considering applying, that you're now in a much stronger place to do so. And with that, I'll thank Anita and Abby as well and end the webinar there.